Hi friends. So it's Derry Wars, Chapter 3, Part 4. The chapter's called Decision, and still there's this situation inside the restaurant. The only people there now are Wesley, with his gun, Patrick, who's the hostage, and Shiela, seeking to try and keep a conversation going. Inside the restaurant the air was tense, but Shiela was trying to lighten the atmosphere with nice buns, Austin's best, and some responsible conversation. Despite her nervousness, she knew the best thing she could do was try and get these two men to understand each other. She thought about it carefully, and then she plunged in. Well, Patrick, we all know that you were an IR activist back in the day, so why did you decide to get involved in that? I mean, there were a lot of people who had the idea that Ireland should be united, but they didn't take up arms. Why did you? The councillor looked at Wesley and the pointing gun, but there seemed to be no objection. I was a young kid growing up in the bogside, and times were tough. In the 1960s, Ma had some work at one of the shirt factories, but Dad had no chance of a job. He was a clever one, but he'd only the very basic education, and we were in the worst area of male unemployment in these islands. He'd been away working in England, and it seemed that every one time he came home, Ma ended up pregnant again. So we were now 9 kids, and I was the second one. He was working on the motorways over there, but when that dried up, he just couldn't get anything, and Ma wanted him home anyway. I guess we were all getting a bit hard to handle. And also if he was there at home, she could do some other time. Because one thing that was going for us was that the factory had work. It had orders coming out of its ears, and my mother was a great stitcher. While the place had work, so did she. But at the same time, the civil rights marches were getting going, with Ivan Cooper, Bernadette Devlin, demanding that we, that was the poor in general, but Catholics in particular, Wesley, that we get equal rights in housing, employment and everything else. It was a time for civil rights everywhere, Shiela. The black folk in the southern states of America had won the respect of so many by saying enough is enough and we ain't taking it no more. I thought it was fair enough too, and that as Britain had allowed its Protestant supporters here to trample on us for a whole generation unhindered in the north, it would be right to support the marches to see could we get some justice in this place. He waited to see if there was a reaction from Wesley Crockett. But the gunman had decided that a condemned man should be able to make a long speech if that's what he wanted to do. The Sinn Féin man continued, addressing his remarks at Shiela because it was her that had raised the question, and also it was easier not talking straight to a gun. There had been rioting before, but I hadn't been involved in any of that. Though my father had been a lifelong nationalist, he didn't believe that violence was the answer. He wasn't happy at some of the talk in Derry at the time. Though he was angry at internment and the heavy-handed attacks on peaceful protesters, indeed it was because of his anger at these things that as a family we joined the peaceful protest about internment in Derry on Sunday, January the 30th. My father said that the British had one set of rules in Britain and another one in Ireland, and he was sure that internment without trial would never have been allowed there in Britain. We followed the crowd and started out with uncles, aunts, cousins and neighbours, but some broke away to riot with the army nearby. The only shooting I heard was from British guns. Some early and some later. I was 21 years old and was close to my cousin. How do you think I felt, Wesley, when he was gunned down in cold blood by British paratroopers that day? A young unarmed man shot dead for shouting abuse at the army. I don't think that you'd approve of the events of what became known as Bloody Sunday. Well, do you? Wesley was looking down at the barrel of the gun. My father was not responsible for the events of that day. Nothing you say excuses an innocent man being snuffed out as he slept. Well, we get to that. But do you agree that the events of that day, as shown by the long overdue inquiry, were not just? Patrick moved his whole body to face Wesley now. Well, do you? Shiela had to admire the courage behind those steely eyes that demanded an answer, even though he was in the line of fire. Without even deciding to speak, she said very gently, "It might help the situation if you tell him what you think, Wesley." The gunman looked her in the face. She smiled at him, and it was his turn to be impressed at the young girl who seemed to have lost her fear. Well, he waved the gun as he spoke. If the findings of the inquiry are true, then what happened was wrong, because it's wrong to shoot protesters who are unarmed. Patrick looked pleased. Well, thank you for that, because there have been very few Protestants who'd actually say so. A flicker of something passed between them, all three of them, a momentary meetings of minds, but it didn't last. So that's your excuse for joining the IRA, is it? When you killed my father, I didn't go and join the UVF. So you say, Wesley, and I believe you, but you did have a legal system bent in your favour. I was eventually sentenced for shooting your father, but not one paratrooper has ever been tried for the events of that day, nor for other similar incidents. What are you saying here, Patrick? Shiela was trying to keep the talk going. What I'm saying is that I went home that night, and I told my father that I'd seen enough, and that I believed only the IRA could ever bring about a just solution in the country as a whole, and that I was sick of being a second-class citizen in a British colony. What did your father say to that? Shiela was genuinely interested. Patrick looked out of the building towards the sky outside. He just sat there by the fire in our run-down house, with all the family watching and with his head in his hands, and told me to do what I felt was right. And yes, Wesley, that night my brother Desi, myself and a whole lot of other young men informed the IRA that we wanted to sign up as volunteers. Huh, where did it get any of you? Crockett was pointing the gun at him again. What did a wonderful Irish Republican Army do for you or any of you? First of all, it gave us our pride back. Pride? Proud to belong to a bunch of murdering gangsters? No. Pride to be doing something, to fight back, to be part of the solution instead of just lying down under the problem. Oh, aye. And are you proud now? Are you proud you murdered my father in a cowardly way in his sleep? Is that a cause for pride? Well, you've enough to say so far, so answer that. Wesley was getting angry again. I'm proud that I fought for the Irish cause, Wesley. But if I'm going to be honest, I will tell you the truth. No, I am not proud of what I did to your father, and I do regret it. Then why did you do it? Don't you give me that guff about obeying orders. The Nazis tried that at the Nuremberg trials, and it just wasn't considered an excuse for them, and they died just like you will. Shiela looked alarmed again. Her eyes dashed about the room. She didn't understand all of this. How could coming to a job she loved become a drama like this so suddenly? She was praying for help, but she wasn't sure what to do. The room was very silent, and noises drifted in from outside. Voices, a helicopter hovering overhead. Both the men knew the sound of those, knew those sounds, familiar because of the years of the Troubles. So, still a bit more of chapter 3 to go. Hope you're continuing with it. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. It's worth writing if you listen. Love and peace to all of you, my friends, from Kate and I. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.